Today, we're unraveling a story from one of the darkest chapters in history. It's 1937, and in the forests near Leningrad, a group of children, yes, children, stand ready for war. These young Soviet pioneers, clad in gas masks and military uniforms, train tirelessly, preparing for an attack. But who are they preparing to fight? And what became of these young soldiers in the making? This is the story of the Soviet Young Pioneers Youth Group, a generation of children trained to fight in an era of looming catastrophe. To understand why these young children were being trained for war, we first need to dive into the turbulent times of the late 1930s. This was Stalin's Soviet Union, a place of paranoia, militarization, and intense fear of foreign enemies. By 1937, the Soviet Union was preparing for potential attacks from multiple fronts, with threats perceived from the West and growing tensions with Germany and Japan. But the Soviet leaders didn't just rely on their soldiers. They wanted an entire nation ready to defend itself, including its youngest citizens. And so, in these times of constant fear, children across the country were inducted into the Young Pioneers, a youth organization that trained millions of Soviet children in skills ranging from first aid to military drills. By the age of 10, many were already being taught how to use gas masks, fire rifles, and respond to air raids. It was a far cry from the typical childhood we know today. The Young Pioneers, officially known as the Vladimir Lenin All-Union Pioneer Organization, were the Soviet Union's answer to the Boy Scouts with a distinctly militant twist. Children between the ages of 9 and 14 were initiated into the organization, where they took oaths of loyalty to Stalin and the Communist Party, pledging to serve their country without question. These children were indoctrinated from a young age, told they were the defenders of the Soviet Union's future. For them, being a pioneer wasn't just about fun and games. It was about learning survival skills, military tactics, and understanding that they, too, were soldiers in waiting. In 1937, with tensions rising, young pioneers across the Soviet Union began training with a renewed intensity, especially those stationed near military-sensitive areas like Leningrad. This brings us to that unforgettable photograph from the Leningrad region, showing young pioneers training in gas masks, standing side by side, as if preparing for the unimaginable. Their gas mask drills were intended as preparation against the potential threat of chemical attacks. After all, it had been less than 2 decades since World War I, when poison gas was used extensively, and fears of chemical warfare still loomed large. The enemy they were preparing to fight was anyone who posed a threat to the Soviet state. Official propaganda warned children of spies and foreign enemies lurking around every corner. They were taught that the capitalist countries in the West, as well as Japan and even former allies, could be the aggressors in a future conflict. The young pioneers prepared tirelessly, believing they could be called upon to defend their country at any moment. But did these children ever have to face a real attack? In 1937, these pioneer units in Leningrad did not go into actual battle. While they trained for combat and learned to respond to chemical attacks, they never had to put their skills to the test in live warfare. However, just a few years later, their worst fears would come true. In 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, bringing war directly to the doorstep of these young pioneers. Many of the children who trained with gas masks in the 1930s were now teenagers, and some were sent directly to the front lines. In Leningrad, these former pioneers became part of the defense force during the brutal siege of Leningrad. Their gas mask training became a reality as the city prepared for chemical attacks that fortunately never came. But they did face starvation, bombings, and unimaginable hardship. The siege of Leningrad became one of the deadliest blockades in history, lasting nearly 900 days. Over 1 million civilians perished from hunger, cold, and relentless bombardments. Some of these children, once photographed in their gas masks, were now fighting to survive a city under siege. Others, who were sent to the front lines as teenagers, experienced firsthand the horrors of war, many losing their lives before they even turned 18. Those who survived carried these memories for the rest of their lives. The young pioneers who once played at being soldiers had become real ones, witnessing death and suffering on a scale most adults could hardly imagine. And although many had trained to be soldiers, they were still children, innocent lives caught in the web of political ambition and conflict. The story of the young pioneers in gas masks serves as a haunting reminder of the sacrifices made in wartime, often by those far too young to understand the gravity of it all. In Soviet Russia, these children were seen as symbols of loyalty and strength, molded by the state to defend their homeland without question. But in the end, they were still children, carrying burdens meant for adults. Today, that photograph of the young pioneers stands as a powerful symbol, a reminder of the innocence lost and the lives forever changed by war. And while these children trained for a war that didn't come in 1937, they would soon face a nightmare far worse than they could have imagined. So, what do you think? Should children have been prepared for war in this way? Or was this an act of propaganda gone too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have any stories from this era, we'd love to hear them. Make sure to subscribe for more stories from history that echo into our present. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.